What's good, Tristan Talks, everybody, or whatever, Tristan Talks family. Hope y'all have been doing well. I'm gonna try to get my upload schedule a little like every single day. I'm going to try, but today we're talking about. Um, I've been obsessed with Micheal Parenti lately, and I've been watching all of his videos on his archive library. And I want to talk about imperialism, drugs, and social control, and how those three things relate. So, we know the story of the war on drugs, as the drugs are a criminal problem, and so then the government declares a war on drugs. That's the standard question. But in this video, Micheal Parenti starts off saying, what if drugs are not only something governments fight, right? What if drugs are something that can be tolerated, weaponized, and politically managed in ways to serve power? That's a question. But we're going to break down this talk, but not as like a conspiracy theorist, but as a framework to understand imperial power and covert operations and domestic policing can link together. So the thesis that Parenti argues is that drugs can function as two tools in two directions. Abroad, drug economies can be used or tolerated in the shadow of U.S. intervention and covert strategy. His second is at home. Drug panic can justify surveillance, policing, and incarceration, and the political containment of targeted communities. They're both saying drugs are a tool used at home or abroad. But first, who is Micheal Parenti? Parenti was a political scientist best known for critiquing U.S. empire, corporate power, and the ways common sense gets manufactured through media institutions. He's not primarily doing a forensic crime investigation when he's talking about this. He's doing a political analysis. He's asking you to track incentives, beneficiaries, and the gap between official narratives and actual outcomes. Parenti, he's very blunt when he talks. He looks at patterns and says, if we keep seeing the same outcomes, maybe they're not accidents and maybe they're actually strategic. Just because you don't know what they're doing doesn't mean they don't know what they're doing, right? These people, when we talk about Israel, when we talk about America, these people are smart people and they know what they're doing. And you think it's dumb because you don't know what they're doing. But it's not dumb. It's smart stuff. But you just don't know. You call it dumb and say it's stupid and it's useless because you don't know what it is. But in this video, we'll try to separate what is historically documented, what's widely alleged and debated, and what Parenti's structural interpretation of why these relationships appear again and again. So here's how the basic mechanism is how covert operations create dirty ecosystems. So step one, the U.S. wants influence in a region for strategic, ideological, or economic reasons. Direct intervention is costly and unpopular. The opinion polls will say, the Americans will say we don't need to be in Iran. Trump will say, I don't give a fuck about what the Americans say. We're going to be in Iran. Not simply to have them overthrow the government or to exert democracy, but we're going to get into why. So this policy often relies on proxies, right? So militias, client regimes, intelligence networks, and friendly strongmen. What do proxies need? Proxies need money. They need a lot of money. And so in many regions, the fastest money comes from illicit markets. So that's arms, smuggling, and narcotics. So you can get an ecosystem where drug networks are not necessarily created by the U.S., but can be tolerated and protected and indirectly empowered because they align with the goals of the strategy's goals. But the key distinction here is Parenti doesn't need the claim that CIA invented drugs. His point is more like saying that Covert strategy can produce immunity for allies, and that immunity can allow criminal economies, including drugs, to expand. So he also wants us to notice how the phrase war on drugs functions politically. When leaders declare a war, they just don't describe a problem, they create permission. Permission for bigger budgets, expanded police power, harsher punishment, and reduced scrutiny. Because questioning the war can sound like we're supporting the enemy. But in Parenti's framing, the drugs become a flexible enemy. At home, the enemy is the criminal or the dangerous population. Abroad, the enemy can be used to justify intervention. While simultaneously, allied forces may benefit from the said drug economy. When the government's your biggest drug dealer, I'm not. But this is what Parenti calls social control. Not because the drugs aren't real or harmful, even though they are, but because the political response can be designed to control people more than solve them. And we're going to get a couple examples. So Southeast Asia, war zones, and the drug economy. One place, like a lot of scholars often discuss different drug economies alongside Cold War strategy is Southeast Asia, especially with the Golden Triangle, like region parts of Thailand and Laos. Historically, these countries have been associated with the opium production, with the opium wars created by England. So the point Parenti's trying to make with these is that not every detail is centrally planned, but that war zones create conditions where local warlords control territory, armed groups need funding, and narcotics becomes a war currency. In many conflicts such as this, the immediate political party or political priority, becomes a defeating rival power. It's like we're defeating a rival power or movement, and that priority can override concerns about allied actors' criminal activity. So, in Parenti's framework, the question isn't did a single agency run everything? The question is, when is the political objective is dominance? Or how often does the anti-drug morality actually come second? We should also take that we should treat operational claims with caution unless we have clear documentation. But the general relationship between conflict and armed proxies and narcotics funding is a well-known feature of many war economies. Excuse me. Another example is like Afghanistan and the anti-drugs talk versus the actual reality. Opium production in Afghanistan has been a major economic and political factor for decades. The reason why this matters to the argument Parenti expressed is because it exposes a contradiction. Governments can publicly condemn drugs while navigating a political reality where there are local power brokers and corruption and survival economies that intersect with narcotics. He uses this kind of example to argue that the main goal is stability. And what does stability mean? Stability means not making sure there is any social uprising, right? You can end up tolerating systems that keep the place governable, even though the systems involve the drug economy. But this doesn't mean every official supports drugs. It means drug eradication becomes inconsistent when it collides with strategic priorities. So when strategy conflicts with morality, strategy often wins. And then another one is the most famous one we all know is Iran and Contra. The cocaine controversy and the Contras. Excuse me. In 1980, the government in Nicaragua, I think I said that right, was viewed as a threat to the U.S. influence during the Cold War, right? The U.S. supported controversial forces seeking to overthrow or destabilize the Sandinistas. I think I said that right. I don't know. This period produced the Iran-Contra scandal, covert funding, arms deals, and a web of relationships. Within that web, allegations emerged that certain Contra associated networks were involved with cocaine trafficking, and the U.S. officials sometimes knew of such allegations or maintained relationships with actors connecting to that drug trafficking. These are serious investigations, and there are reporting documents that trafficking allegations existed around the Contra leaked figures. There has been a long debate about the extent of institutional responsibility and knowledge and consequence, but to Parenti, the key point to this structure is that when a proxy war is priority, some actors get protected space, and criminal economies can expand inside that space. Even partial tolerance is politically significant because it suggests that the war on drugs can be selectively enforced, but harsh on some populations like the blacks, African Americans, and Latinos, and Cubans, and flexible for others when power is on the line. And then Colombia, anti-communism and the narco label. Parenti wants us to notice how big the drug label operates abroad as moral framing. In many regions, armed conflicts involves insurgent groups, state forces, paramilitaries, and international support. But when you slap the narco label on it, it can serve multiple political functions. It delegitimizes an opponent and says they're just criminals. It simplifies complex political conflicts into a moral police story. Like, these guys are just criminals and the police are just doing their job. It's not that simple. And it builds public support for this intervention, because who wants to defend drug traffickers? It doesn't sound morally right, but that's because you don't know what's going on, and that's why you need to read. I didn't say that. I'm just. But this doesn't mean insurgents never touch drug economies, right? It means that a label can be selectively applied in ways that align with policy goals. So Parenti is pushing us to ask, when the U.S. supports one set of armed actors in economic and condemns the other, is the drug narrative applied consistently or strategically? And we're going to talk about domestic social control. Why do drug policy hit some communities harder? Now we bring it back to America, because for Parenti, the foreign and domestic sides are connected. At home, the war on drugs has often been aggressive policing, surveillance, and mass incarceration. Parenti's argument is not that drugs cause harm. Parenti's argument is that drugs don't cause harm. His argument is that the political response has often treated harm like a policing opportunity. Think about what mass policing means or does beyond crime control. It marks communities as dangerous. It increases state presence through stop and frisk style encounters. It creates criminal records that block jobs, housing, voting. It fractures families and community institutions, and it generates fear. And then that fear reduces political participation. In a social control lens, this is power. A population under constant surveillance is a population that is easy to manage. Policing is political when it shapes who can fully participate in society. How are we supposed to have black liberation and an uprising when we're shooting each other and shooting needles in our arms? And it's not because the drugs don't cause harm. Of course the drugs cause harm, but this is policing. They have made it so you don't have an uprisal. They have made it so you don't have a social rising. It's the same thing that happens at home. It's the same thing that happens abroad. Right? Let me know if I'm lying. I'm flying. But here's how media and the manufacturing of consent comes into play. Parenti frequently critiques media not because everything is fake, but because media chooses emphasis. Drug stories are emotionally powerful. They involve danger, moral panic, and simple villains. These people are just inherently evil. They are the problem. That's what the media will say. They're druggies and they're criminals, and we should just kick them out of society. They're the problem, and they're the reason why you can't find a job. Maybe you just suck. It's not that simple. But yeah, they will use that as a scapegoat. The scapegoat theory, everybody knows that. Does everybody know that? So the media loop can do three things. Let's do three. It amplifies fear. It narrows solutions to police and punishment and discourages structural explanations like unemployment, like segregation, like housing, like healthcare, like trauma. And this matters because if the public thinks drugs are mainly a policing problem, the police expansion sounds more like common sense. If the public sees drugs as healthcare, poverty, trauma, policy failure, then punishment looks less like safety and more like control, right? The narrative often steers you towards control as the default solution. But that is because the media has framed it as drugs are a policing problem and not a control problem. And so that's why we back behind these cops when they say we're going to Venezuela to stop the drugs, and then we're going to Panama to stop Manuel Noriega and the drugs. They want to control Panama and Venezuela. Just how they want to control these black and brown and Latino and Latina communities. So who gets punished and who gets protected, right? When drugs are connected to poor communities, what happens? There are often raids, police surveillances, and more condemnation. When drugs are connected to elites, or powerful allies or strategic partners, there's often soft accountability, selective informants, quiet deals, or it's complex. It's too hard for you to understand. Even if you disagree with the point I am making, this is the challenge I'm trying to get you to understand. If drug policy is true about harm reduction, why does enforcement often map onto power? Right? But a true lecturer and a true intellectual will always try to figure out the other side. What does the other side think? And if you can't figure out what the other side thinks, you may need to take a step back, because you don't know if your side is right. There are elements of where these people are just outright wrong, and they will get you for speaking truth, just how they did Ross Perot when they told him to go into these countries and find drug traffickers, and he didn't find any, but he found the U.S. government in these countries doing the drug trafficking, and he came back to George Bush and said, it's actually America doing these drug traffickings, and then they kicked him off real fast. They don't like it when you speak truth, and sometimes there is truth to stuff, but a fair lecture often includes objections. So I'm going to make it fair. The objection one by many people will say drugs spread for many reasons. Demand, poverty, profit. Not because of imperialism. Yes, sure, but imperial policy can shape which networks thrive and which communities get punished. The CIA is not a single mastermind is another objection. The thing I'm saying here, I'm not relying on a comic book mastermind. I'm not relying on no Megamind or no Lex Luthor. I'm analyzing, and Parenti's analyzing institution incentives and outcomes. Why do people do this? Why are we abroad selling drugs? And then how does it affect domestic? How does it affect us at home? How does it affect black and brown communities and Latino and Latina communities? Another objection is that the government spend money fighting drugs. Doesn't that prove sincerity? Institutions can fight the visible symptoms while benefiting from the same political effects. They can have bigger budgets, stronger police power, and controlled domestic population. You don't have to accept that's how they you can fight. You could say you're fighting to go spend money fighting drugs, but you benefit from that same system. You don't have to accept every claim that to accept the key analytical move. We track incentives, beneficiaries, and patterns of selective enforcement. I'm not sitting here saying that I'm sitting here and I'm right and you're wrong. I'm sitting here saying that this is the pattern and this is the outcome, right? But what do we do with all this? I'm not asking you, or nor Parenti is asking you to memorize scandal trivia. I'm asking you to see drugs as political infrastructure. What we should be doing is asking questions like, when the U.S. intervenes abroad, who becomes an ally? And what criminal economies are tolerated under that allowance? And at home, when drug panic rises, what new powers become normal? Right? Who absorbs the cause? And in the media, which explanations get airtime and which are treated as taboo? If the war on drugs were purely about health and safety, it would look like healthcare. When it looks like mass punishment and selective enforcement, that's not healthcare, or that's not no war. That is social control. But that's all I had for today. Imperialism, drugs, and social control. Micheal Parenti. Thank you. Bye.